This is David Wiggins from George Mason University, and I'm a member of the National Academy of Kinesiology. I was inducted in 2007 with the number 483, and I'm talking this afternoon with Dr. Jerry Thomas. Dr. Thomas was inducted into the National Academy of Kinesiology in 1984 with the number 299. Jerry is currently the Dean of the College of Education at the University of North Texas. He previously held positions at Iowa State University, Arizona State University, and Louisiana State University. A prolific scholar, Dr. Thomas's research in motor development has focused on cognitive factors, expertise, and gender differences in children's motor skills. He has authored a plethora of research and professional publications, including his very well-known graduate textbook, Research Methods in Physical Activity. Jerry has served as the C.H. McLeod Lecturer and Alliance Scholar, Editor-in-Chief of the Research Quarterly for Exercise and Sport, President of the North American Society for Psychology of Sport and Physical Activity, President of the Research Consortium of AFERD, and is considered the first president of New American Kinesiology Association. Jerry, it's great to have you here this afternoon and have an opportunity to chat a little bit. Let me ask you, first of all, could you just talk about your early childhood experiences, talk a little bit about where you were born and raised and family background?
Sure, I'd like to do that, Dave. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama. My family background is Welsh. In fact, my dad was the first person in his family not to work in the coal mines. And he did work for the coal company, but became a bookkeeper for the coal company. He was quite good in math, and interestingly, ended up his career as vice president for finance for U.S. Pipe and Foundry. So quite an accomplishment for a first Welsh coal miner who wasn't in there, and was quite important in my life. In Birmingham, I attended elementary school in Central Park, which is on the western side of Birmingham, and went to West End High School. I was fortunate. I studied hard, and of course, my dad pushed me really hard to end up as salutatorian in my high school class. I was pretty active in sports as a kid, playing baseball and softball and football, and played football and ran track in high school. In fact, in 1958, that ages me clearly, I held the Birmingham high school record in the 100-yard dash, the 220-yard dash, and the broad jump. Now, granted, I didn't hold them very long. By 2 or 3 years later, most were broken, but at one point I held all of those. And I was also a all-city running back in football at West End.
Now is that so your dad was someone, you said he was very influential in your life.
Oh, absolutely.
In what way? Could you maybe expound on that a little bit?
Sure, I can. No one in my family had ever been to college. And from the first time I can remember, my dad talked about me going to college. And in fact, I have 2 younger brothers. All of us went to college. All of us have graduate degrees. But Daddy just was insistent that education was important. And as I said, he was quite accomplished if you consider he had a high school education. And he checked our homework every night. We'd do our homework. If we needed help, he'd help us. But if no matter whether we asked for help or not, our homework got checked by him before we took it to school. And I guess the worst thing that could happen to me was to get in trouble at school, because if I got in trouble at school, I was really in trouble at home.
Now, was he also an athlete?
He was not a great athlete. He played high school baseball and was a catcher, but didn't play much beyond that, or any beyond that, as far as I know.
Okay. Now, how did you find your way? And I hope I'm correct about this. How did you find your way to Furman? Isn't that where you took your undergraduate degree?
That's correct. As I said, I played high school football, and I was a pretty good player. I was an all-city running back, and I got recruited by a number of schools, including Alabama and Auburn, Texas A&M, and Georgia Tech. But Chuck Rowe, if you know anything about track and field, you'll know that name. He was the head coach at Tennessee, won the SEC championship quite a few years, but Chuck started at Furman as track coach and assistant football coach. So he came through Birmingham and went to the city athletic director recruiting for both track and football and said, "Who's the fastest kid in Birmingham who plays football?" And so Chuck recruited me at West End. I went from West End. I went to Furman, and that was the first year. Furman has a spectacularly beautiful campus.
Yes.
And that was the first year on that new campus. And when I got there, I was in love. And so I signed with Furman within a couple of weeks of my visit up there, even though I had a chance to go some other places. Bear Bryant spoke at my high school football banquet because Billy Battle and I, Billy Battle's athletic director at Alabama now and played at Alabama and was head coach at Tennessee. Billy and I were on the same high school team, and Bear was recruiting both of us.
Interesting.
And he got Billy, who was very successful. He probably did just as well not to have me.
Well, did you end up playing all 4 years at Furman, or did?
Yes. Freshmen weren't eligible back then, so we had a freshman team, which was basically fodder for the varsity. But then my sophomore, junior, and senior years, I played at Furman, lettered all the years, started a lot of games, was injured a fair amount, so didn't start every game. But played against Alabama and Bear Bryant, which was interesting.
This is maybe a bit of an aside, but there's a well-known sport historian by the name of Bill Baker, and I thought that he played at Furman.
He did. He played quarterback when I was there. He's 1 year ahead of me.
That's Bill's a very good friend of mine.
Oh, he's a wonderful person. He was a great quarterback, good student at Furman, just one of the nicest people you could ever know. The only negative thing about Bill is he was an SAE rather than being a KA.
He has done some, as you probably know, I mean, he's written some very, very good stuff in sport history. He's written a wonderful biography of Jesse Owens, for example.
Yes, I know he has. I've seen some of his stuff.
Yeah, so that's it is a small world. That's for sure.
Well, at a place like Furman had 1,200 students when I was there.
Wow.
My high school was twice that big.
Now, how did you find your way then? Even though Bear wasn't able to recruit you to Alabama, you eventually ended up going to Alabama for your master's and PhD. How did that happen?
Well, the way it happened, I could never have afforded to go to Furman without a football scholarship. Now, we had enough resources that Dad would have sent me somewhere to school if I hadn't had athletic support to go. But when I finished, then I went back to Birmingham and got an assistantship at the University of Alabama in the physical education department to pursue my master's degree. And so, I chose Alabama mainly because it was close to home and because if I was hungry and didn't have enough money, I could drive to Birmingham and eat and a few things like that. I'll tell you a Bear Bryant story involving me if you want to hear it.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, when I got to Alabama, Bear was advertising for graduate assistants, and I was looking for a graduate assistantship. And the physical education department had one, but Bear had one too, where he was looking for a grad assistant. So I went and interviewed. It was interesting because he remembered me. He a really old gravelly voice, and he said, "Hey, I know you, don't I?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You played at West End with Billy, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "And you went to that little old Furman school and didn't come down here with me, did you?" And I said, "That's right, sir." And he said, "And then we played you and you ran the opening kickoff back for a touchdown." And I said, "Yes, sir." Now remember, they beat us 51-6. So he looked at me and he said, "I ain't hiring you."
Oh, that's a funny story. Oh, did you enjoy your time at Alabama?
I did, and actually not getting an assistantship with athletics was the best thing that ever happened to me because I got an assistantship teaching elementary PE at one of the local elementary schools. And I just fell in love with children and working with children in my whole career of research and teaching and everything has been driven by the fact that I really enjoyed teaching elementary school.
Well, very good. Let's go on to another question, Jerry. If you could provide really a brief rundown of what you consider the highlights of your educational and professional career.
Sure. Of course, going to Furman was a big deal for me, and so I got my Bachelor of Arts degree there in physical education in 1963. Went to the University of Alabama and got my master's MA degree in 1964, and then taught a year in elementary school in Birmingham, and then was department chair and athletic director when Jefferson State Junior College got started in Birmingham. I was the first athletic director and department chair. And so I started work on my doctorate. I got my doctorate, and my doctorate's in EDD. I got it at Alabama in 1970. My first job was at Georgia Southern, what was then college, now university. And I was there 3 years. Then I went to Florida State University and was there 4 years. And a little later, when we talk about people who influenced me, I'll talk some about Bob Singer, because Bob was the chair at Florida State who hired me.
Okay.
Then I went to Louisiana State University in 1977 as department chair, and I'll talk some more about Jack Nelson and Amelia Lee later at LSU, who've been very influential. I was there 11 years. Then I went as department chair to Arizona State University in '88. Stayed there 10 years. I was department chair 4, associate dean of the grad college 3 years. Then I went to Iowa State University and was chair there 10 years, although one of those years I was also the interim dean of the College of Education. And I was actually going to retire at ISU, but Gretchen Bataille, who was a good friend of mine from Arizona State, had left there, made a couple of moves, but was president at University of North Texas. And they contacted me about the dean's job here, and I took it, and now I'm in my 7th year as dean here at UNT. Let
me ask you that, are you, maybe this is a loaded question, but are you enjoying your time at North Texas?
Yes, I have enjoyed it here. The political atmosphere in Texas wouldn't be one that quite pleased me, but the University of North Texas is a very nice university. People are very good. It's a big university. We have 36,000 students. And two of our majors in the college, kinesiology and teacher education, are among the top 2 or 3 enrolled majors in the university. So it's quite a nice place, and I've enjoyed, people here have been very nice to me, and I've enjoyed working here a lot.
Well, I know, of course, it's the kinesiology faculty that I know best, but you certainly have a strong group of kinesiologists, that's for sure, but it looks like you have some other strong programs within the college as well.
We do. We have a good teacher education program, good ed psych program. Probably our best program is counseling. It's ranked in the top 20 nationally.
Jared, let me ask you, maybe reverse the order of questions a little bit. Let me ask you next about what early leaders in the field most affected your career, and if you could provide me with any anecdotes, any special stories about those individuals, that would be great.
Sure. At Furman, Dr. Ruth Reed and Dr. Ike Carr were the main 2 people when I was there. Ruth's still alive, living in Greenville, South Carolina. She was just very professional. She pushed me really hard. Ruth didn't like athletes all that much. and there weren't a lot of athletes that majored in physical education at Furman, probably because Ruth didn't like them very much. But Ruth pushed me really hard. I really didn't appreciate Ruth till I got to graduate school. She was an Iowa PhD and very measurement oriented, and so I got a really good background in that area. And so Ruth was important in me going to graduate school and pursuing graduate work. Now in Alabama, Willis Boffman was my major professor. Willis was an Ohio State PhD with Delbert Oberthofer.
Sure.
And most people, or many people, will know Willis because he was president of Southern District and of AFER. He pushed his students really hard to be professional. I'm quite certain he was surprised when I turned out to be a scholar. I'm certainly the only one of his doctoral students who did. Many of them are fine professionals that teach at good places, but I may be the only one who's ever published more than 2 or 3 papers. but Willis was a wonderful person and certainly influenced me to be very strong professionally in working in AFER and all the different organizations I worked in. A person who influenced me a lot is Bob Singer, who of course is an Academy member.
Yes.
Bob came to Florida State in '73, I think, a year before I got there, and as department chair. And he hired me from Georgia Southern. And of course, Bob was a fine scholar, even back then, had a leading motor learning book. And he really influenced me toward scholarship at Florida State. And so Bob was important for me. I went to LSU after that as chair. Jack Nelson was chair of the search committee. He's a really well-known measurement person. And Jack has turned out to be my closest friend. We've been friends 37 years.
Wow.
I'm afraid to estimate how much beer we drank in 37 years. But Jack was a really fine person. And the other person at LSU who was particularly influential for me was Amelia Lee, also an Academy member. And Amelia and I worked together. She and my wife Kathy and I have a couple of textbooks, elementary physical education textbooks together.
Mm-hmm.
And so she influenced me a lot. Then there were a few other people who, just by their professional nature and our friendships, who are NAK members who had a lot of influence. Bob Christina is one of those. Bob and I both like to play golf, and when we got to be in the academy, we organized the golf tournament for several years and emceed programs, and so we had a lot of fun. And he was very influential. When I was chair at Arizona State, I hired George Stelmach from University of Wisconsin.
Sure.
And George, you could argue, who is also Academy member, of course.
Yes.
George, you could argue, is the best thing that ever happened to Arizona State. I don't mean just in kinesiology, I mean period. He had always had RO1 grants from NIH, sometimes 2 or 3 of them. I wouldn't be surprised if you look back at who brought in the most money in any 10-year period at Arizona State. It wouldn't be George, no matter what area you're talking about. 2 or 3 others, I know you've interviewed Juanine previously, and Juanine and I have been good friends a long time, and she's certainly influenced the things I've done. Then Glenn Roberts, who was at Illinois and then moved to Norway, University of Oslo. And Glenn and I have been friends a long time. And then from more a scholarship perspective, Vern Seefeld at Michigan State. Vern's just a fine motor development scholar. He and I have been friends for years and years. And I just admire everything about Vern, his work, his professionalism, everything. So that's a group of people that's probably had a lot of influence on my life.
Now, am I correct that Vern, I believe, for a number of years headed up the Youth Sport Institute at Michigan State? Is that true?
That's correct. He did. In fact, in 70, how long ago was that now? 75, I guess. I edited the first youth sport manual that AFER did. And Vern worked with me very closely in that, wrote a chapter in it. He did wonderful work in motor development and youth sport at Michigan State, and I mean, you just couldn't think of anyone who's had more influence.
This is going to go off script a little bit, Jerry, but you mentioned, I believe you mentioned working with Amelia Lee on a couple of textbooks.
Yes.
It got me to thinking, and this is a question that might not be answered very easily because there's a lot of choices. My question is, do you have any books, any research articles that you're particularly proud of and that you think have had the most significance on the field?
Yes, I do, actually. And let me just mention one thing. You mentioned earlier the research methods book, and that was done with Jack Nelson at LSU that I mentioned earlier. And in particular, that's the thing I think I've had more influence on the field with than anything else. We're just doing the 7th edition right now. We brought Steve Silverman a couple of editions ago on board, another Academy member. But the articles I'd like to mention, I think, Karen French, who did her PhD with me at LSU and had a long career at South Carolina, is just getting ready to retire, I think. A wonderful pedagogy, motor development person.
Yes.
We did a paper that was published, a meta-analysis of gender differences across age in motor performance that was published in Psych Bulletin. And that's my most cited paper. There are over 400 citations to that paper.
Wow. Wow.
And it's one that I'm exceptionally pleased with. Also, Karen's dissertation with me is very highly cited with over 300 citations to that. That's a joint publication. She's first author, of course, on on her dissertation. Another paper that was Sue McPherson's dissertation at LSU and that I chaired has nearly 300 citations to it, and all the work or the dissertation work with Karen and Sue was all expertise work with children, and so I enjoyed both of them, and certainly those are among my most highly cited papers. I've got a few methodological papers that are highly cited, one from Quarterly with about 240 citations or so, that was on effect size and the probability, significance of probability relationship and why effect size was important. And in fact, I've got a little follow-up note that'll be in Quarterly in December that looks at some of the characteristics we looked at there in Quarterly nearly 30 or 25 years later.
Nice.
So you know, I've been, people have been very kind, and you know, if you go to a place like Google Scholar or those kind of things, you can see people's work and their citations, and the ones who signed up for that Google Scholar category thing, their name will pop up. I've done it. My name pops up, and it would give you all of my citations to all of the papers and all those kind of things.
Well, you mentioned Karen French. I'm sure, have had a very large number of PhD students who have gone on to their own productive careers. I mean, as a faculty member at Louisiana State and Arizona State, of course, I'm assuming you've had a large number of PhD students that have gone on to make a name for themselves as well.
Well, depends on what you mean by large. I've had 11 PhD students over my career. I've never taken more than one at a time. A couple of occasions, I had one just finishing up and took a new one, because I want to work very personally and very closely with my PhD students. But you're right, I've had some really great ones. Karen is certainly one of those at South Carolina. Jerry Gallagher, who's been at Pitt most of her career, who's associate dean up there. My wife, Kathy Thomas, who's on the faculty here, was one of my students before we married. Sue McPherson, who's at Western Carolina. In fact, Karen and Sue were identified by, I've lost the guy's name now, one of the big people in expertise, but across all areas, not just sport expertise. Karen and Sue were identified as two of the leading scholars in sport expertise by him. So that was really something that pleased me too.
Oh, I'm sure. Jerry, any special memories of those individuals who were inducted the same year into the National Academy of Kinesiology?
Yeah, there were. In fact, your doing this prompted me to go back and look at the list. There were 6 of us inducted that year, and all of them were friends and good scholars. Claudine Sherrill is someone I've just always loved. She was at Texas Women's University here in Denton.
Right.
But Claudine was just one of the nicest, finest people you could ever know. Now, she was very funny, very enjoyable to be around, but just one of my absolute favorite people, and a really great representative of our field, and led in the development of the adapted physical education area.
Right.
And just a really great person. And so Claudine, I suppose, out of that is the one that I've maintained the closest contact with and know the best.
Um, Jerry, could you talk some about what you view as the major turning points in kinesiology? The good things that have transpired over the years, maybe not so good things. Just in your view, kind of those major turning points in our field.
Sure. Of course, I was still in college when Franklin Henry wrote his paper on the discipline. But as I got my doctorate in the 70s and into the 70s, 80s, 90s, the development of kinesiology as a discipline and as a profession is probably the best possible thing that could have happened to us. And there was a lot of discussion about this and a lot of writing, and I wrote about it. Probably the person I most admire who was the best thinker and wrote about it was Carl Newell.
Sure.
Carl just wrote some really great papers, and of course a member of the Academy and at Penn State. Mm-hmm. But that development of the discipline just undergirds the whole field, and in my view has saved the field. If we had not done that, I don't believe our field would look anything like it does today. Now, a result of us doing that is the huge increase in undergraduate enrollment we see right now.
Sure.
And that's being driven in large part by the allied health profession. Because physical therapy, occupational therapy, those areas have identified kinesiology as a good undergraduate major. So we see plenty of undergraduate programs with over 1,000 students enrolled. Now, when I was at Furman, we had about 15 undergraduate majors.
Right.
Kinesiology, which they've redone as allied health at Furman, is now the biggest major at Furman. We have 1,500 undergraduate kinesiology majors here at UNT. University of Texas and Texas A&M, they have huge enrollments, as do many other places. And I really do believe that the establishment of our field as having a strong disciplinary foundation, not disregarding the professional aspects of it, like physical education and fitness leadership and those areas. But I don't believe we would look anything like we do today if that had not occurred. So I think that is one of the really good things that has happened over the last 30, 35 years that leaves us in really good stead. Now, that there are a few others I've thought about too. Part of this is a negative that influences us positively, and that is the obesity issue. Mm-hmm. And the role that exercise and physical activity and skill development can play in reducing obesity. And that's made a huge comeback for physical education teachers in the school. We were in danger of just losing that altogether, but people now see the value of that, and so that negative aspect has had a very positive influence on our field. The fact that the National Academy of Kinesiology got into the evaluation of doctoral programs, I think, is very important. Mm-hmm. I think that got us into the U.S. News and World Report evaluation of doctoral programs that occurred a few years ago. If we hadn't already done one round of that, I don't believe we would ever gotten in there. And we continue doing that at NAK, and a field that's serious about itself and its programs evaluates itself. And so this is an important feature. There's one more thing I think I'd like to talk about a minute here. Well, maybe two. One that's positive and negative, and one I'm not sure about yet. We seem to have evolved within the sciences, at least in kinesiology, into two lines of research. One is physical activity health related, and the other is sport related.
Right.
Unfortunately, we have no funding at all for sport related research.
Right.
Now, there is good funding for physical activity and health related. If we look around the world, if you look at Australia and Germany and Russia and England, they all fund sport related research. We don't do that. That's a really negative. In the long run, that's going to hurt sport in the United States, in my view. And so, now, used to, there were some grants through the Olympic Committee and places like that, but those are not there anymore. And we're making a mistake. I don't mean just we in kinesiology. I mean, the United States is making a mistake in not funding sport-related research, because sport is very popular in the United States. Then there's a negative and positive aspect to that. There's one more thing I want to mention briefly, and that is the public health arena. Some of our programs are moving into that, and I can understand why. Public health is very strong in support of physical activity and health and those kind of things. But public health has no place for sport-related research. If you look at their objectives, the three main pillars that they have, there's nothing you can build around sport-related research there. So I think that's unfortunate. The other thing I worry about is your area and philosophy, history and philosophy, because those are important to our field, and yet we're not producing scholars in those areas, or at least very many scholars. And you go around most major research universities, and they will not have a person in history or philosophy in the kinesiology department. And I think that's a mistake we're making. And you and Scott Kretschmeyer and other people have spoken about this issue, but nobody's listening.
You know, well, you said several interesting things, Jerry. Why do you think that the United States is not funneling money into sport-related research, but is funneling money into physical activity? I mean, what do you think is the difference? Why Australia? Why Germany? Why would they be funding sport-related kinds of research and not the United States? Do you have any thoughts? And
that's a really good question. And they're funding it mostly in Olympic-related areas because they want to develop outstanding athletes in sport-related research. The U.S., there may be a couple of things that influence that. One is, I don't think our field is now valuing sports skill development in children enough. We're putting huge values on physical activity and health. But most people, when they become adults, are not just people who run or run on a treadmill or walk. They play sport.
Sure.
And if you want them to play sport, you need to teach them skills. And we're not doing that, I don't think. At least we're not doing it as much as we should. Now, we've been very much a sport country, and so we see people with a lot of talent who play sport, and sport is very popular. And we do pretty well in the Olympics and these international competitions, and I think maybe people think we don't need that, but we do need that. And in the long run, it's going to hurt us if we don't have that funding. And like take National Institutes of Health, I don't think people can get that kind of funding for sport. They get it for physical activity and health.
Right.
Not very many people have tried to connect sports skills with regular physical activity and health, and that might be a way to go there. But we simply do not have organizations at the national level like Germany and England and Australia and other countries have, where their purpose is to fund sport-related research to improve mostly Olympic performance.
Right. Very good. Jerry, the next question is one that you probably answered to a certain degree, but I will ask it anyway. Why did you choose to teach and conduct research in the area of kinesiology for which you are best known?
Well, I told you the story about Alabama and the graduate assistantship, and
Yes.
that truly changed my life. I was convinced I wanted to be a high school football coach. And after I taught elementary kids 1 year on graduate assistantship and a couple of more years in Birmingham in the public schools, I was stuck on children. I love children. I love to make them happy. I love to develop their skills, to get them to participate in activities. And so it was simply, I wanted to do something to influence that so that children were more successful with developing skills and using skills and participating. And so when I realized that first semester on my master's degree, when I had the graduate assistantship in that elementary school, I thought I got to do something like this. I got to do something with young kids. And so then I thought, well, I'm working on my master's degree and then I'm going to get a doctorate. What am I going to do? And so that's when I decided I'd focus my research and my teaching career both on children. Now, I had some good fortune. I had several things. People don't think often about Alabama as being necessarily a strong doctoral program. I think they're a good program. But, you know, I had that opportunity with the kids, and I had another opportunity with a faculty member in educational research and statistics, Harry Barker. And I had a chance during my doctoral program to have a grad assistantship working for him. And I'm pretty good in math. And so that really drove the other piece of my career in the research methods area, the work with him. And then I got out to teach and I taught at Florida, taught at Georgia Southern, taught at Florida State, and I was using Bruce Tucker's research methods book from education.
Yes.
And when I got to LSU and had a partner to work with like Jack, I said, we need to write a research methods book for the field. And I said, it's not that the research methods differ that much, it's that the examples that the kids can understand and use. And so we did that. And as I said previously, probably the best contribution, you know, I think I've written some good papers and they've been cited, but, you know, I had 4,000 citations to my research methods book. And it's probably, I mean, it's been translated into 7 languages. My wife, Kathy, says 8 languages because somebody had to translate it from Alabama into English, which is probably true. But you know, in terms of just influence, I don't see how anything else I've ever done could have as much influence as that has had.
You know, I sometimes think that people in our field don't stop and think about how powerful and how influential textbooks can be. You know, the students at the undergraduate level, in many cases, are first exposed to folks through the textbooks.
Exactly, and even at the graduate level too.
And at the graduate level, I just don't think we stop and think about that too much. Jerry, what's your hope for kinesiology in the future? And you probably talked a little bit about this already, but recommendations, tips. Where do you think? Maybe another way to ask this is, where should we go from here, in your opinion?
Well, I've been an advocate my whole career for keeping the field united. I'm disappointed that athletic training has kind of broken off from the field and have their own separate degree, that sport management has done that. And one of the reasons I believe that is, in universities, size matters.
Yes.
And we tend to want to break off into little bitty units. So we want all the exercise physiologists and biomechanics people to be in one little unit, and the motor control and development people to be in another. And now, we don't need that kind of. That's why kinesiology has been a really descriptive term for us and important.
Yes.
That it unites all of those things. A real profession and discipline has a clear content area, and I think if you look at the outline of what the undergraduate major should look like that the American Kinesiology Association did, that they're exactly right on. Now, I say that having been part of that since I was the first president of that group. And by the way, I was president of FNAK too. You didn't mention that.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things that I did. But I really think it's important that we stay united, that I would love to see us pull sport management and athletic training back into the kinesiology field, because I think that gives you power. Now, I understand professional accreditation and some of those kind of things, but having a bunch of little departments that all have something to do with sport and physical activity and those kind of things is not a good way to go. It's just asking to be eliminated.
Right.
And right now, we have so many undergraduate majors. I mean, we're a big deal. We got to take advantage of that. The last thing we want to do is split all those people up into different areas. We want the clout that size brings. So that's one of my hopes, is that we won't go off and have a little group in exercise science and another little department in pedagogy and another one in athletic training and those kind of things. So all of that, ties together. Now, I also think we need to keep the focus on fitness and skill development for children and adults. That's really key. That's key to our discipline, and it's key to our professional aspects of the discipline, like fitness leadership and physical education. So that's a place that I hope will stay focused, and we've done some really good things there, but we've got to be the voice there. We can't have other groups certifying fitness experts based on some unrelated set of skills that they may have. They need degrees in our area if they're going to do fitness leadership, and so that's really important for us.
Right, right.
I think we're on the way back, and it's one of the things I'm most excited about, to having greater amounts of physical education in the U.S. schools taught by trained individuals. We're getting more, and of course the obesity and the fitness and those kind of things are driving that, but I don't care what's driving it as long as we get more physical education for kids, because that's really important in
yes,
not only them being kids and being skilled and being fit and having fun, but in their lifetime of maintaining fitness and those types of things. Uh, I also see us, and I hope we continue doing that, increasing the quality of research and graduate programs that we have. I think the NAK doing the evaluation of those has helped. But what I see now, we see our people publishing in the best journals. I mentioned my most cited paper was in Psych Bulletin. Psych Bulletin's hard to get a paper in.
Right.
It's got an impact factor of about 14. But we see our physiologists getting papers in not just Journal of Applied Physiology, but other more core basic journals. And all that says is that we're good scientists and that we're doing good work, that it gets published those places. So that's one of the things I'm excited about seeing. And I really hope we can increase research funding for physical activity and sport. We've got some for physical activity now. We need more. We have none for sport. And I really hope we can increase funding for sport.
You know, Jerry, you talked about your hope that the field can remain united. I think in essence you were referring to, well, what Scott Kretschmer always talks about, the silos that some people have created. Isn't that really one of the purposes behind the American Kinesiology Association? Is in some ways an effort to unite the field?
Yes, it certainly is. And they've made a lot of progress. They've got quite a large number of departments that are now members of that group. And certainly that was one of the goals. I mean, when we set out and established that, the first thing we did was try to establish the principles on which an undergraduate degree in kinesiology should be based. And you don't see that a lot of places about our field, but if you look there, I just had a paper from that collaborative conference back in January come out in Quest this week, where I talked about that a little bit. In fact, talked about several things I talked about in here in that paper. But I really do think this idea that we're a unity, that we have a core on which we prepare people so that they, doesn't matter if they go on to be a physical therapist or they go on to be an MD or they become a physical education teacher or an athletic trainer or a fitness leader, they have that core about what kinesiology is about. And and that's just really important, I believe.
Well, Jerry, fantastic. Is there anything else that comes to mind? Anything that you would like to say or mention or talk about before we come to a close?
Well, maybe I'll just end up saying I've been in our field since 1963. Geez, how long is that? That's 60 years, isn't it? 61 years. No, not that long. 51 years. Surely not 61 years. But one of the things I've observed about our field is the people I've come in contact with all have the right values. Mm-hmm. They value physical activity, they value sport, they value people participating in those things. And I don't think a lot of other fields have this knowledge base that we've developed and the professional aspects of it where it's of value for every person in the world.
Right.
I mean,
absolutely.
There's not many areas that can say that can say There's nobody. If you're in a wheelchair, doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're physical activity and exercise and sport are of value to you. And the fact that we study it and understand it and then apply it, it is phenomenal. And it just kind of makes me proud
well,
that we do that.
And I would second that, and I think it's certainly not just members of the NAK, but others that professionals in the field. I'm excited about. I mean, the students that we have, the passion that they have for the field.
Yes, for sure.
Is absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, when we go to our meetings and see our doctoral students there presenting papers and talking, I mean, that's just one of the absolute most enjoyable things you can do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, listen, Jerry, I won't keep you any longer. I really enjoyed it, and
well, I've enjoyed it too. I appreciate the fact that you will take the time to do this, and that NAK sponsors this. I think it's a good thing they're doing before all us old guys die. But I've enjoyed this conversation. The questions you had prepared were very thoughtful, and they made me think. And you know, I spent several hours making myself notes here.
Good.
on these things, so that I would spend this time on something that at least I thought was important.
Well, I'll tell you, it's been doing these interviews has been really a learning experience for me, and I trust it's valuable to our membership. I hope they do take the time to listen in on what we refer to as Leaders Speaks, because I think they're quite valuable.
And I do too. But where I see the greatest value is that in that faculty will use these things with their graduate students,
yes,
and maybe even with undergraduate students, to hear how things changed and how things developed and what was important, and that's a really critical piece, I believe.
I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. Jerry, thanks so much.
Well, I appreciate you doing this, Dave, and I truly enjoyed it.
And I will, my gosh, I will see you in a couple of weeks in Austin, Texas.
Yes, you surely will.
All right, Jerry, thank you, and have a good afternoon.
You too, Dave. Thank you.
Bye-bye.